Hello, wider listeners, everybody out there in radio land. It is once again that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it's that time of the week where we come onto your radio dial and we talk to you about what is really going on here in the community, that is here in Kalamazoo, here in the county, here in the state of Michigan, uh, in the country of the so-called United States, and all around the world. It is Media Cyphers. It's a weekly show where a couple working class folks from right here in Kalamazoo tell y'all what is really going on, call out the establishment on its BS, et cetera, et cetera. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 WIDR or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. So we've got a couple of really important stories that we're going to be digging into on the program here. I'm going to be flying solo today. Lawrence is off. And one thing that we want to hit on right away, this is some breaking news. This just heard about this today. I literally just heard about this on the way to the station. So Fred Upton, who has literally been the House rep in our district, District 6, since I was born, which is 1987, is stepping down and retiring. We'll read just a couple of excerpts from the MLive article it talks about. And of course, I've got a lot of my own things to say about Mr. Upton, but I just want to give y'all give y'all the facts, the skinny, as it were. So Fred Upton, he announced that he is retiring. He announced this today on the House floor up in Lansing. He said, "This is it for me," around 10 a.m. Today, Monday, April 5th. Upton, Republican from St. Joseph, is Michigan's longest serving member of Congress. He was first elected in 1986. So he thanked his wife, his 2 kids, and 3 grandkids, and, et cetera, et cetera. "I work daily on all things Michigan." He sure did, sometimes for good and often for ill. So talked about, he goes on to talk about some of his accomplishments and some glowing comments, sentiments from some of his colleagues, including a few Democrats like Debbie Dingell. With the redistricting Michigan that went into effect in this year, Upton would have been forced to run against U.S. Representative Bill Huizenga from Zeeland in the primary due to the new congressional district boundaries that placed the 2 multi-term congressmen in the same district. Michigan's newly created 4th district. And I don't have the district lines in front of me, but that'd be something interesting to look at. And I'm sure we will be getting into that as we get closer to primary coverage season. So in 2020, Upton won re-election once again for the 6th congressional district. That was a pretty substantial victory for him. He got 58.1% of the vote. John Holdley trailing with 37.89. So a few thoughts on Upton's retirement. So a lot of conversation. I think local think pieces are going to focus on, he's the last of this kind of string of Republican moderates. He was one of the few Republicans to step forward and condemn Donald Trump for the J6 insurrection. He's kind of leaned into his moderate bona fides, and we see that in a lot of elections. One of the reasons he's really held on to the seat for 26 years is he really focuses on the strategy of getting the Republican base and enough centrists to take over and win the election, despite the prevalence of more traditional Democratic voting blocks in cities like Kalamazoo, Benton Harbor, etc. Now, something I think that gets lost is, when we're doing that sort of like, when you're comparing somebody like Fred Upton to say Donald Trump or, Tom Cotton or, et cetera, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, yes, he is going to look much rosier by comparison. But we really shouldn't forget, there's a lot of stuff here with Fred Upton's legacy that should not be forgotten. Again, I encourage everybody, before this report, I was like, okay, well, let's look up his open secrets and again figure out kind of his legacy through that. Again, this is a guy who took a lot of money from DTE. This guy who took a lot of money from Blue Cross Blue Shield, very much on the forefront of repelling any sort of expansion of healthcare. Did a pivot about 10-15 years ago, and I wish I had the book with me, but Jane Meyer's book Dark Money, which was a really deep investigation into like what politicians are taking money from whom, but she name drops Michigan's own Fred Upton and talks a lot about how you can literally see a change in his policy opinions on issues like the environment and the climate, centered around and this was a time around 2010. The Koch brothers were injecting a lot of money, astroturfing, Tea Party movement and that thing, sort of things like that. And what the book basically says is, Fred Upton was faced with something of a choice, not necessarily spoken out loud, but the idea was, these people further to the right of Fred Upton would funnel money into a primary challenge if Fred Upton did not toe the line of some of these energy extremists and climate denialism and stumping for industries that damage the environment. And you can literally compare like before and after. You had Fred Upton before, who maybe I wouldn't say necessarily tree hugger, but definitely was more conservation minded. Again, even a lot of right-wing politicians in Michigan have to be careful about like we have to preserve our lakes, et cetera, et cetera. But with just a little bit of financial push, he decided climate change was fake. He became a lot more permissive about legislation that loosens the restrictions on what heavy industries can do here in the state of Michigan. And despite the fact that, like, yeah, he may have spoken out a lot during the Trump years about, him being quote unquote rude, Fred, throughout his tenure, was an instrument of capital. And when push came to shove, was willing to put principles aside when the people with the money were making some really big demands. So again, Fred Upton is retiring. Again, this is a breaking story. So maybe next week, I want to come back with a little bit of a deeper analysis on this. Maybe talk a little bit more about Bill Huizenga, the state of the race for this upcoming, now I guess we're in the 4th congressional district. And the question does now become, so, ding dong, Fred Upton is gone, but does that mean we are in for something worse? It's worth speculating. Obviously a lot of this new cohort of Republicans are leaning into far right tropes, propaganda, leaning heavily into this kind of white supremacist dog whistling, it's critical race theory, et cetera, are fully leaning into a lot of the misinformation about the 2020 election, saying it was stolen from Donald Trump. So it is worth wondering, is Fred Upton just going to be replaced with somebody more extreme? And again, I want to come back. I want to look at, I really would like to look at what this 4th congressional district looks like, what the boundaries are, because we can try to speculate a little bit. Fred Upton, again, he has won the 6th congressional district historically by really playing towards the middle. In fact, Fred Upton in the 2018 election cycle almost lost to Matt Longjohn. He came very, very close, just a few hundred votes. And Matt Longjohn was somebody who played into, again, was kind of able to thread that needle, the whole "I'm not a politician" thing. People who typically have a respect for medical doctors, so I don't know how. Be interesting to wonder how that would go post pandemic. Yeah, Matt Longjohn was able to nearly take the district. Eventually, he did lose. In no small part thanks to Joe Biden. Told you that story a couple years ago. Joe Biden came to Michigan during that election cycle to stump for Fred Upton. Thanks a lot, Joe. And it is worth wondering, does this mean maybe somebody more liberal has a chance to secure that seat in the future, or we depending on how the district district boundaries are set up, we might be getting a more Trumpian extremist in office. Of course, as always, whoever wins, we lose, and it is quite likely that whether it is the pick of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, we are going to get a servant of capital. Again, you got to keep pushing the grassroots. And again, hopefully I'll be bringing you a bit more detailed report next week, and we can see, what kind of politician us on the ground are going to have to be pushing up against for the next, hopefully not 26 years, but we'll see. All right, we're going to take a quick little break. Again, y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You also can watch us online. We're uploading our videos on YouTube. I believe we'll also be airing on the public media network, so you can check us out there. If you still got cable, or maybe got some older relatives trying to deprogram them from cable news, they don't necessarily use the internet. Well, they can come listen to me as a working class person telling it how it really is. And of course, we have a podcast that you can download on most podcast apps. Really puts together the best of our radio program for your listening pleasure. Anyway, we will be right back. Only here on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We are back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Again, this is WIDR Kalamazoo. Also, you could be listening to us online or possibly watching us on PMN. We just talked a little bit about this breaking news. Fred Upton is stepping down. I want to drill down and talk about something even more local. It's actually literally just down the hallway from where I am speaking. And I just wanted to kind of share this out verbatim. Again, local student media is incredibly important to not only me, but everybody here at the station, I'm sure as well. There is Western Herald just dropped an editorial about some changes that they think could potentially damage or hurt their ability to do the kind of local and national coverage that they do. So I'm just going to read it, and I might have some thoughts at the end, but this is from the Western Herald editorial board. Western Herald isn't guaranteed an office in the new student center. Here's why that's a problem. And this was published on March 30th. Western Herald was informed today we would not have a specifically reserved office space in the new student center, as we were previously told in discussions concerning our move to the new center. From the first drafting of building plans for the new student center, it was intended the offices for Western Herald and Wider FM would be moved to the new building from their current and longtime residents over at Font Student Services. In the summer of 2021, Western Herald was informed the new student center would have a student media space with broadcast studios and a conference room open for all RSOs to reserve time in. Western Herald and Wider would both have a small office space in the student organization area, but no specified newsroom. After Western Herald was made aware of these plans and they were presented to the Student Media Group board, the board collectively expressed concern for the lack of office space for Western Herald to operate in. The plans had not been previously presented to the Student Media Group as a collective before they were approved. In order to effectively cover campus news, we need a private space to discuss our coverage and editorial decisions. Since our first paper was released over 100 years ago, we have had a space on campus to allow students to complete our operations. Currently, our basement space in Fonts has separate offices, an office for the editor-in-chief, video editor, business manager, and advertising manager. In addition, we have a general newsroom, green screen room, and dark room. 20 years ago, these offices were bustling with students working to complete ad requests and produce content. At the time, our budget for the year regularly fell between $250,000 and $500,000, and roughly $60,000 contributing to payroll. Now our budget is limited by how much money the Student Media Group is allocated by the student assessment fee and whatever revenue we can generate. Currently, we are attempting to rebuild our production and sales capability after the COVID-19 pandemic nearly ended Western Herald's operations entirely. Having a centralized office space was essential to our regrowth. Through the hard work of students, we have been able to rebuild our operations and lay the foundations to grow our newspaper back to the production level we were once at, reimagined and redefined for the current generation. If we don't have a reserved office space in the new student center, we may not be able to maintain that growth. Furthermore, having an office space will make Western Herald more easily accessible for students trying to get involved. In order to fully provide students with the opportunity to participate in a student newspaper and maintain the longevity of WMU's oldest RSO, Western Michigan University must ensure that the Western Herald will have a specified office to conduct our operations. And then it talks a little bit about some of their fundraising goals and ways that you can donate to the Western Herald. And again, you can find that online at westernherald.com. And that is the editorial is called Western Herald Isn't Guaranteed an Office in the New Student Center, and here's why that's a problem. So again, I want to give a big props to the Western Herald, which again does a lot of really important local coverage, sometimes talking about local and national politics in a really important way from the perspective of students. And one thing I really want to put a pin on when we're talking about this is the importance of local independent media. Now, as we've been talking to you about throughout the run of our series, but especially the last couple of episodes, and we might comment on this again later in the show, over the last 20 years, the state of journalism in this country has been getting continuously worse and impeded. Again, the show was started as kind of a response to the corporate media monolith that exists today, which is to say, in a nutshell, all of our main media outlets are run by a handful of multinational corporations, and dissenting views that maybe are critical of capitalism, critical of imperialism, just critical of the status quo, are shoved aside, marginalized, and as we've increasingly seen, just kicked off of platforms outright. We were talking just the other week about how a lot of really critical programming from RT America has been completely wiped off of YouTube. There's a really great interview with Chris Hedges. He talks to Democracy Now! About his program On Contact, which we've actually featured on the show before. Has incredible, important information talking to organizers, historians, activists. And again, YouTube sees the opportunity presented by our current tensions with Russia to pull that off of their platform. We've also talked about how Many independent left-leaning platforms have been demonetized on YouTube, or search engines like Google have altered their algorithms. So a lot of these working class left-leaning news outlets end up picking less traffic. There's a really brilliant article from World Socialist website from a couple of years ago where they do a really important deep dive into this. So that makes local media important all over again. And I say this in the frame that again, about a decade ago, there was a lot of talk about the death of local media, the death of newspapers, etc. And as Rage Against the Machine once said, it seems like it's coming back around again. And by that I mean we are now starting to see a lot of these corporate controlled platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Google, etc., actively purging this really important content that is again critical of the system. So that makes it all the more important for us to have outlets like the Western Herald, for our show to be doing what we're doing here on public radio. Because if you are not able to find that stuff online, you can still find that critical coverage here by picking up your local newspaper or tuning in to your local radio station. That is still an option that is available to you. Chris Hedges' content might have been completely deleted, along with many other leftists over the years. Thus far, though, I have yet to be kicked off the radio. Knock on wood. That's something I feel really strongly about. So I'd really encourage everybody, check out the editorial, see what you can do to help, express your support for the Western Herald and the important coverage that they do. And again, remember, I really feel in the years ahead, this sort of tightening of acceptable discourse its grip is going to continue. And we're going to see more and more of these anti-establishment voices purged from these platforms, which again makes outlets like the Western Herald, outlets like the show that we're able to do on Wider, all the more important. So we're going to take another quick break. Come back. We got some more coverage for you. If you're listening to radio, you're going to hear some important information. If you're listening on any of our other platforms, you're just going to have a quick little pause here. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Again, your only source for political revolution. You can listen to us on the radio. That's every Tuesday from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m., 89.1. You can listen to us online. We upload our videos onto YouTube, which is funny. I just spent a big chunk of that time dunking on YouTube. Although actually an interesting follow-up to that is so we upload our videos on YouTube. We've kind of uploaded our material in many different ways. During the pandemic, we were uploading a lot of our stuff directly to Facebook. Right now we have a podcast that you can subscribe to, which I would highly encourage that if you like our coverage. But yeah, as I said, we've also been uploading our stuff to YouTube over the years, and something I did want to point out, not to sound paranoid or weirdly full of myself, but our shows used to get between 100 to 250 hits per episode on YouTube, which isn't a lot, but it's fairly substantial for a local program. But over the last year and a half, we've been able, you could maybe count the number of hits of our episodes on two hands. Now, I don't know, maybe people just aren't interested in the show anymore. I don't want to disinclude that possibility. Although when I go back and listen to some of our older material, I have a feeling our newer stuff is of better quality than the stuff we used to produce. Yet again, we're getting very, very few, much fewer hits than we used to. Is it because of the highly political nature of our content? Is it because we're critical of capitalism? Well, who knows? But I do know people much bigger, more popular, with a much larger following than us have experienced very similar problems. So that's just something worth noting. But hey, the videos are still on YouTube until they get taken down. So you can look those up there. And again, like I said, we have a podcast that you can subscribe to on most podcasting apps. Anyway, we're going to take a quick little break. And we come back, we got a lot more to talk about here on the program. Y'all listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for radio evolution. Hello, everybody. We're back. This is Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR online or widerfm.org. By the way, if you're watching the video of this, some of y'all might see this. If you're a Star Trek nerd, you might recognize what it is. That's everybody's favorite Antifa super soldier, Kira Nerys, stylized to look like Che Guevara, which again, bravely fought the Cardassian occupation. That's Star Trek Deep Space Nine, if you aren't a huge nerd. But I'd recommend, I think you can still check it out on a couple streaming platforms. Anyway, next thing I wanted to talk about, again, one of the big things we do on the show, calling out the establishment on its BS. And I got some BS I want to warn y'all about. The far right plans to again destroy public schools are once again manifesting themselves in some local trickery here at the state level. Again, Betsy DeVos is up to some of her old tricks, and I wanted to give y'all a heads up about a petition going around that has some tricky language. So this is from the Michigan Educational Association, and they dropped this little brief on March 17th. But it says MEA is part of a new coalition opposing DeVos's voucher petition scheme. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. So Michigan educators, parents, and families have formed a new coalition opposing Betsy DeVos's latest school voucher petition drive. And the coalition is actively seeking supporters to help stop this new scheme in its tracks. Public education advocates announcing the coalition called For Michigan Kids, For Our Schools, at a virtual media event Wednesday. MEA is part of the growing coalition, which aims to educate Michigan citizens on how DeVos's voucher proposal would drain $500 million a year from public schools for the benefit of for-profit private schools and their wealthy investors. The coalition is urging Michigan voters to decline to sign DeVos's petition and stop her from getting the signatures she needs to put the voucher proposal before the legislature. Due to a loophole in Michigan law, Governor Gretchen Whitmer would be unable to veto DeVos's proposal if her shadowy organization, Let Michigan Kids Learn, is able to obtain the required number of signatures. And again, this is very like Republican kind of 1984 tactics, couching these terrible proposals in fuzzy Democratic sounding language. Think Citizens United, think Right to Work, etc. Let Michigan Kids Learn. Oh boy. Anyway, paid circulators are collecting signatures for the measure can even lie to voters, often couching the measure as scholarships for needy kids. Rick Catherman, a recently retired Chelsea music teacher who participated in Wednesday's press conference, pointed out that teachers, students, and parents today are carrying an increasingly heavy load. He cited the worsening school employee shortage, student mental health, school violence, and endless standardized testing as just a few examples. Catherman said the solution to the challenges facing public education is to provide schools and families with more help and resources, not less. The last thing we should be doing is cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from a school every year and giving it to private for-profit schools, which is what the dangerous voucher proposal does. So again, this goes back to, ever since I have been, since I was a little kid, we've been seeing these kind of proposals come back and back and back again. This idea is that we can funnel some of the money that is supposed to be set aside for public education for these vouchers that will subsidize students to go to these private schools, colleges, etc., usually Christian academies, or again, schools for the very wealthy, just another way to get out of their taxes, I guess. And the main problem with this is, again, it's this kind of perpetuating self-fulfilling prophecy. So there, these right wingers will come out and say public schools are in shambles. We should have the right to send our students, our kids, to these private schools. The government should pay for that. Well, of course, when you pull more funding from public schools, that gives those public schools less resources, and they continue to drop in quality, despite some of our wonderful teachers who are doing their best, despite all the myriad number of attacks on public schools nowadays. So again, the quality of our public education decreases when you pull more and more money towards funding private schools, and the conservatives are able to make private schools look more attractive in comparison after they have actively defunded the public side of those schools. Again, this is a long-standing strategy and tactic, and we've talked a lot about Betsy DeVos and their agenda on our show before. Maybe I'll link to some of that in the show notes. But again, it is the objective of people like Betsy DeVos to basically wipe out public education as we know it, leaving just these private schools that can kind of play footsie with the facts, tell this very revisionist, hyper patriotic version or as I like to call it, Disneyland version of American history, where we were always the good guys and nothing bad ever happened, and et cetera, et cetera. Typically, teaching from a Christian theological perspective. And I was saying, like, again, a lot of these schools, if they were actually teaching Christianity, you'd have a lot of Jesus inspired socialists running around. But no, this is kind of conservative socialism where rich people are great, and we should and Jesus wanted us to not help the poor, and basically just act as a family unit. And anyway, so yeah, just that's a warning. I personally have not seen any petitioners out with this in the Kalamazoo area. But if you hear that name, if you hear a petition tied to let Michigan kids learn, or they're couching in that language of scholarships and whatnot, they may be trying to bamboozle you into signing off on some legislation that will again continue to bankrupt public education. And again, as we've talked about on our show, public education has been coming under a lot of fire lately from these hyper conservative elements trying to scare everybody up about critical race theory, which again, it's worth repeating, is an idea that is discussed primarily in collegiate law school, but conservatives have somewhat successfully turned into a scare word for their base. Or against some of this anti-gay, anti-trans legislation that's sweeping across the country. And as we like to point out, some of y'all may obviously point out, won't this make teaching or operating public schools far more difficult? And the answer is yes, and that is exactly the point. Basically trying to dismantle our public schools through attrition, through making it increasingly difficult to even want to teach or operate in these institutions, because you might get hounded by the right-wing mobs, because you might be, like, God forbid, you might be trying to talk to the students about racism or history in a way that is actually accurate, and not trying to frame it in the sort of glorious city on the hill mythology that many Republicans take for granted as complete and inalienable truth. So again, we're gonna take another quick little break. When we come back, we got more to talk about here on the show. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR, or online at widerfm.org. You can also check out our program online in a number of ways. We have a YouTube channel. You can check out. We upload full episodes onto there. We have a podcast. You should be able to find it on most podcasting platforms. We put the best material from our show, put it together. You can download it, listen to it on the bus while you're at work, maybe radicalize some of your coworkers, that kind of stuff. And I do believe we will soon be on Public Media Network. So for those out there, maybe you got relatives who're still just watching the news, tell them there's an alternative to CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. It's this guy. You can check him out on PMN. So again, we're going to take a quick little break. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody out there in Radio Land. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. So we were just talking about this petition that, again, is trying to defund public education, is trying to embrace this voucher model where we siphon money from our public schools into these private schools. So I wanted to, while we're on the topic of education, there's an article from Truth Out. It's more about this agenda on the broader national level, but I thought it was important to tie into what we're discussing here and the overall assault on public education we've been witnessing over these last few months. So this is an article from Truth Out. Headline is GOP lawmakers are trying to prevent students from learning about Reconstruction. It's written by Jesse Hagopian and was published on April 2nd. It's time for a new Reconstruction story, a story that will help us better understand how we got here. A story where the central characters are the Black people who fought to liberate themselves, who gained political power despite every attempt at violent repression. That was Kadeta E. Williams, the associate professor from Wayne State University. The above quote greets readers on the homepage of a new Zinn Education Project report on state education standards on Reconstruction and how this crucial history is taught and mistaught across the country. Reconstruction refers to the period following the Civil War until around 1877, when a radical movement for Black power and wealth redistribution swept the country. The consequences of Reconstruction's unfinished revolution surround us, permeate our experience of daily life, provide crucial lessons for understanding our world today, and suggest important methods for uprooting systemic racism. And for that very reason, guardians of the status quo have long sought to hide Reconstruction's unprecedented advancements for Black people from students in a concerted effort to deny them the anti-racist lessons this history affords. With the current assault on education, the attack on truthful teaching about Reconstruction has dramatically intensified. Some 41 states have introduced legislation or pursued other measures that inhibit conversations about race and seek to mandate that educators conceal the history of structural racism in the U.S. 15 states have actually imposed those restrictions. Systemic racism or systematic racism should not be taught to our children. State Senator Michael McClendon argued during the Mississippi legislature debate on the anti-critical race theory bill, which he introduced. Quite evidently, he doesn't mind perpetuating systemic racism by sponsoring racist bills. He just has a problem with students learning about it. Upon signing this bill into law, Governor Tate Reeves claimed that teaching about systemic racism serves only to humiliate students. Historian Stephen West pointed out the irony and familiarity of this language, which was used during Reconstruction by congressional Klan supporters, causelessly humiliated by strides towards racial justice. From Alabama to Arizona, from Missouri to North Carolina, educators around the country have told the Zinn Education Project they fear these laws will further restrict Reconstruction education, which was already woefully neglected and distorted. Lee R. White is a high school social studies teacher in Winthrop, Iowa, one of the states that banned teaching about racism, sexism, and other so-called divisive concepts. White says that the political climate of the conservatives pushing back against teaching anything negative about our history threatens to seriously interfere with the teaching of Reconstruction. Denny McCabe, a retired Iowa educator, noted that these efforts could create a chilling effect on current teachers who need to teach about white supremacy and racism in order to do justice to the topic. Our report, Erasing the Black Freedom Struggle, How State Standards Fail to Teach the Truth About Reconstruction, the first comprehensive study of all state standards on Reconstruction, found that states' established education standards woefully ignore the role of white supremacy in ending Reconstruction, reproduce a racist and false framing of Reconstruction, and obscure the contributions of Black people to Reconstruction's achievements. Only Massachusetts standards mention white supremacy and its direct link to the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the passage of Black codes and Jim Crow laws, and the defeat of Reconstruction. Georgia's standards of excellence instruct teachers to compare and contrast the goals and outcomes of the Freedmen's Bureau and the KKK. The Freedmen's Bureau was a government agency founded to help provide freed people with the shelter, clothing, supplies, and education they needed after the Civil War. The KKK is a terrorist organization. Asking students to compare the two creates a dangerous false moral equivalence. Zen Education Project curriculum writer Ursula Wolf Roca describes some of the other problems with state Reconstruction standards. In many states, Reconstruction only appears on a list of topics or themes teachers should address for a particular time span. In Maine, Reconstruction doesn't even merit that much space. Maine standards define the period 1844 through 1877 as regional tensions and the Civil War. Connecticut, too, leaves out Reconstruction in its list of themes like westward expansion, industrialization, and the rise of organized labor. Why are the lessons of Reconstruction under attack or hidden from students? Because the right-wing attack on voting rights, the attack on critical race theory, and the escalation of open white supremacy are all aided by what Professor Henry A. Giroux calls the violence of organized forgetting. Giroux describes the violence of organized forgetting as an effort by elites to hide vital lessons of the past that could empower social movements, such as the historical legacies of resistance to racism, militarism and privatization, and panoptical surveillance, which have long been forgotten and made invisible to the current assumption that Americans now live in a democratic, post-racial society. Given the severity of this intellectual violence, we must defend ourselves with what I will call the healing of organized remembering. Collective efforts in schools, but also in social movements to recover vital historical lessons about challenges to injustice that have been concealed. Retrieving the legacy of Reconstruction is one of the most important undertakings towards this healing. Reconstruction was an era of mass social movements and unprecedented advancement for racial justice. With a system of slavery just recently abolished, more than 1,500 Black Americans were elected to office, many in majority Black districts whose people could vote for the first time. In the 1860s and 1870s, 16 Black Americans served in Congress, about half of whom were formerly enslaved. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, known as the Reconstruction Amendments, were added to the Constitution and respectively abolished slavery, with the shameful exception of those who've been in prison for a crime, extended citizenship rights to Black people, and granted Black men the right to vote. The exhilarating ferment during the original era of Black power are captured by the report's description of Reconstruction. Black people organized to fulfill freedom's promise. They struggled to set the terms of their own labor, advocated for state-funded public education. And that's important to consider thinking about the assault on education that we've just been talking about. Access to land, the right to vote, and the right to serve on juries. They participated in state constitutional and political conventions, built churches and mutual aid organizations, and ran for and held political office at every possible level of government. Yet the forces of white supremacy led a brutal counter-revolution that ultimately defeated Reconstruction. One of the primary strategies to dismantle Reconstruction was the war on Black education, just as today's GOP attack on what it calls critical race theory is the centerpiece of its strategy for re-election and reversing the gains of the uprising for Black lives. Black people understood that there was no true emancipation without education, and after the Civil War, they set about building the first public school system in the South. Consequently, white supremacists were threatened by the hundreds of schools built by Black people. Historian Adam Fairclough explains, the root of the issue was the same as ever, white control over Black labor. Planters and landlords worried that education diminished their supply of cheap labor by drawing Blacks from the country to the city, away from tenancy, sharecropping, and day labor. Fairclough quotes one white resident of North Carolina saying, "To give him any education at all takes him out of the field, and he's not worth anything to the farmer." This sentiment was behind the Klan and other terrorists burning down well over 600 Black schools between 1864 and 1876. The attack on truthful education today must be understood in this historical context. Black education and anti-racist instruction have always posed a threat to an American social order built on a foundation of structural racism. The irony is the attack on critical race theory in education confirms one of the central claims of the theory, that any advancements for racial justice will be met with a white supremacist backlash. That was the case when Black people started the Reconstruction Revolution, and it's the case today in the wake of the 2020 uprising for Black lives, described by the Washington Post as the broadest protest in U.S. history. A concerted effort has been made throughout history to distort, sequester, and deny the strides toward a multiracial democracy that Black people made during this incredible period. And yet, racial justice organizers, Black scholars, and social movements have always kept the true legacy alive of Reconstruction. In his 1935 masterpiece, Black Reconstruction, W.E.B. Du Bois debunked the white supremacist lost cause narrative that advanced the pseudo-history of a noble confederacy defending itself from Northern aggression. Black leaders often referred to the civil rights movement as the second Reconstruction, and Martin Luther King Jr. very much understood the importance of the first one, saying, "White historians have for a century crudely distorted the Negro's role in the Reconstruction years. It was a conscious and deliberate manipulation of history, and the stakes were high. The Reconstruction era was a period in which Black men had a small measure of freedom of action. Far from being the tragic era white historians describe, it was the only period in which democracy existed in the South." Today, educators, students, and parents are building a movement to teach truthfully about structural racism and raising their voices against the violence perpetrated on students' intellectual development when Reconstruction is erased from school. Over 8,000 educators have signed the Zen Education Project's pledge to teach the truth about structural education or structural racism and oppression. In an open letter aimed at school administrations across the country, over 200 scholars of U.S. history urged school districts to devote more time and resources to the teaching of the Reconstruction era in upper elementary, middle, and high school U.S. history and civics courses. The task that remains for those of us interested in making Black lives matter to the institutions and political structures of our society is to complete and extend the efforts that were undertaken during Reconstruction. As Ann Arbor Middle School teacher Rachel Toon said, Reconstruction is the single most important era for students to understand. Everything that is happening in the world today can be traced back to the way Reconstruction happened and how it was thwarted. Again, if you'd like to read that article, you can find it at truthout.org. Headline is, "GOP lawmakers are trying to prevent students from learning about Reconstruction." We're going to take another quick little break. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find our full episodes on our YouTube page and check out our podcast. You can find it on most podcast platforms. You download it, listen to it at your leisure. We put together the best of our conversations and analysis and put it up via that. And I also believe you can check us out on your TV, your cable television at Public Media Network. Anyway, we will be right back. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers, your only source for political revolution. Hello, once again. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. Only here at WIDR Kalamazoo. Well, of course, you can also check us out online, particularly PMN and such. So next thing we want to talk about is a statewide story. We are going to be talking about, well, former President Jack-o'-lantern made an appearance here in our state of Michigan over the weekend. We want to talk a little bit about that. I think there's a really good bit of coverage from the World Social website I'm going to be reading from. I do want to drill down a little bit. It is almost a follow-up to some of our discussion last week where me and Lawrence were sitting down talking about the contest for who's going to be the nominee for the Republican Attorney General. And one of those individuals, Matthew DePerno, lives right here in the Portage, Kalamazoo area and is running or competing, I should say, with Trump's endorsement. And once you hear what he said at the rally, you'll probably be able to guess why. And honestly, really bugs me. Just like, it's like the guy's campaign photo was taken down in the Kalamazoo Walking Mall, which is like, yeah. Sorry, Kalamazoo is as far as I am aware, Kalamazoo is an anti-fascist city. So it's gross. You got feel like doing that stuff on purpose just to rub it in. Anyway, I'm gonna be reading from this article from the World Socialist website. Stumping for America First Republicans, Trump holds campaign rally in Macomb County, Michigan. Is written by Jacob Cross, and this write-up about the rally was published on April 3rd. Seeking to cement his grip on the increasingly fascistic Republican Party ahead of the 2022 midterms and the 2024 presidential election, Donald Trump held a campaign-style Save America rally in Macomb County, Michigan on Saturday night, his first rally in the state in over 17 months. The event was held in Washington Township. Macomb County voted narrowly for Trump in 2020, with Washington Township giving him his biggest margin of victory in the county. The rally was at an indoor venue holding about 5,500 people, making the turnout considerably smaller than at Trump rallies earlier this year in South Carolina, Texas, and Arizona. The event took place less than a month before a Michigan Republican Party nominating convention and served as an opportunity for Trump to promote his preferred batch of Republican candidates for the 2022 midterms. His fascistic diatribe lasted for nearly 2 hours, during which he repeatedly claimed that the 2020 election had been stolen. He warned the far-right crowd that the biggest danger facing the country was not from Russia or China, but from sick and radical politicians who knowingly and unknowingly want to destroy our country. Now, I want to say that, again, this far-right rhetoric, there's something smart about it. It drills down to a kernel of truth. People have this distrust of the government and the people in power, rightfully so. But again, the sick and radical politicians, the one who knowingly and unknowingly want to destroy our country, those are the politicians who are taking major campaign contributions from insurance companies, from the fossil fuel industry, who are proponents of capitalism, like Mr. Donald Trump. So, again, it's this case of like taking a kernel of truth, something that people feel instinctively is true, like the government is corrupt, and giving them all the wrong answers to that question. Like, why is the government corrupt? It's because of these deep state Democrats, blah, 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 blah. No, as we talk about our show, the answer is both parties. The answer is capitalism, but it is to the benefit of capitalists like Donald Trump and the Republican Party to basically present a straw man for their base to get enraged out, rather than giving them a more detailed or correct analysis that at the end of the day would show the bourgeoisie to be the villains, and they really don't want to do that. So again, the kind of conspiratorial candor of Trump and a lot of these Republican candidates is, again, it's by design. It's not just because like, oh, they're crazy or whatever. It's because offering these alternative explanations as to why their base is actively being repressed or depressed or whatever serves their interests. They wouldn't want their base to figure out the truth, which is to say that we are all being oppressed by the capitalist system. Anyway, Trump attacked President Joe Biden for the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and coming to power of the Taliban. He claimed that Biden's weakness encouraged Russian President Vladimir Putin to invade Ukraine, something Putin would have never dared to do under his watch. A little bit of revisionist history there, but I'm going to keep going. As in all of his stump speeches, Trump focused on anti-immigrant incitement. He denounced the corrupt media for hiding the supposed fact that the U.S. southern border was being invaded by criminals. He accused Biden and the Democrats falsely of cutting funding for immigration and customs enforcement, thereby allowing nests of killers to pour into the country. Now, as we reported before, the truth, and something that we have critiqued the Biden administration about many times, is that actually many of the policies have remained as oppressive under Biden as they were under Trump, and that he has broke many of his promises about, for instance, closing down the concentration camps on the southern border. Biden is being brutal to immigrants just as well, but again, Trump and these other Republicans, it is always in their interest to find a scapegoat, and again, with it is best to find like a foreign scapegoat. So again, scary criminal immigrants, etc. Other Republicans speaking at the rally echoed Trump's fascistic attacks on immigrants and pledged their loyalty to the former president and would-be dictator, especially his central claim that the 2020 election was stolen by Democratic officials who needed to be held, quote unquote, accountable. And we talked about this a little last week. Trump lost Michigan by over 154,000 votes and was outpolled nationally by Biden by a margin of 7 million votes. Not every speech at the event, including Trump's, or nearly every speech at the event, including Trump's, included anti-Semitic insinuations against Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg and the supposedly corrupting influence of his donations to the 2020 election process. So I want to touch on that real quick. So what's really interesting is, the Republican base and a lot of this right-wing base, they do understand there's something wrong with the billionaire class. So what the Republican Party does, and these far right orgs do, is like they cherry pick a couple of billionaires as the particular boogeyman. So, and it's always like kind of a rotating list. Maybe it's George Soros, maybe it's Bill Gates, maybe it's Mark Zuckerberg, which again, it goes on to talk about, Democrats being in the pocketbook of Mark Zuckerberg, but again, Facebook also donates to Republicans, and at least publicly, Democrats have been very critical of Facebook about their role in promoting a lot of the kind of fascist material that helped pump up and promote the J6 insurrection. So again, a little bit more revisionist history coupled with the whole, hey, looky there, the billionaire class isn't all bad. It's just these particular ones. Mark Zuckerberg or George Soros, usually somebody Jewish. Like, let's be clear, because if you look at it historically, targeting, particularly like wealthy Jewish folks is a good way to dog whistle and distract the base. And again, make sure that they don't start asking the tough questions about how our system works. Going on, the threat of fascistic violence permeated the rally, with frequent calls from the crowd to lock up Trump's political opponents, including Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Attorney General Dana Nessel, and Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. In light of the ongoing trial of the far-right militia members who sought to kidnap and possibly kill Whitmer in advance of the November 2020 elections, these threats are deadly serious. Trump endorsed state-level Republican candidates Christina Caramo, who is running for Secretary of State, and Matthew DePerno, who is seeking the Republican nomination for Attorney General. Both candidates advanced Trump's lies following Biden's victory that the election had been stolen, and have since repeatedly claimed that the Biden presidency is illegitimate, earning Trump's approval. Trump's intervention into the Republican primaries is part of a nationwide strategy to control the election apparatus in every battleground state. In a report titled Replacing the Refs, States United Action found that as of March 1st, 2022, 53 election deniers were running for governor in 24 states. The authors of the report defined an election denier as a candidate who either claimed that Trump was the winner of the 2020 election, participated in a Stop the Steal rally, or called for a forensic audit of the presidential vote. The report also found that there were 11 election deniers running for Attorney General in 11 states, and at least 22 election deniers running for Secretary of State in 18 different states. Michigan is one of several states that has election deniers running in all three races. In pledging his support to election deniers, DePerno and Karamo, Trump said they would protect us, quote, from a corrupt election. Karamo is a 36-year-old Christian fascist who gained Trump's favor after claiming she had witnessed election fraud at the TCF Center in Detroit during the 2020 election. And we talked a little last week about the whole kind of racial dog whistling undercurrents. The idea, there's already campaign ads that these Republicans are running about, quote unquote, holding Detroit accountable, even though, again, it makes sense with their demographics that Detroit would have gone for Biden. And again, we don't hear them talking about holding Ann Arbor accountable or holding Kalamazoo accountable. Somehow the white liberal cities or perceived white liberal cities got a pass. Anyway, Karamo was one of the plaintiffs in the Texas lawsuit that reached the U.S. Supreme Court in December 2020, seeking to invalidate millions of votes in Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Arizona, 4 states Trump lost to Biden. In a podcast she hosts called Solid Food, Karamo has stated her opposition to all mandatory vaccines, as well as the teaching of evolution in schools. She asserts that the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol was not led by pro-Trump militias, but was instead perpetrated by quote-unquote Antifa radicals. And I gotta say, like, if it was Antifa, well, no, I was gonna say it couldn't be Antifa because, you know, Antifa would have actually, you know, maybe known what they were doing when it comes to the insurrection. Anyway, yeah. Building her bona fides with the fascists, Karamo appeared last October with other America First Trump-backed Secretary of State candidates, such as Nevada's Jim Merchant and Arizona's Mark Fincham, at a QAnon conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. In her speech Saturday, Karamo incited terrorist violence against Benson, whom she called a quote-unquote authoritarian leftist who doesn't care about the U.S. Constitution. Karamo drove the crowd into a frenzy when she declared she had the right to redress my grievances to my government without being called an insurrectionist, without being called a big lie proponent, even though you literally support both of those things. Anyway, echoing Trump, she attacked the corrupt media for protecting Nancy Pelosi and Jocelyn Benson. So again, well, there's no direct connection between those two people. It's again just like a bunch of rage-baiting word salad that a lot of these people are spewing in order to fire up their base. Now talking about Portage's own Matthew DePerno, he promised that he would, quote unquote, hold Whitmer, Benson, and Nessel accountable for everything they have done, prompting shouts of lock them up from the crowd. It's interesting to point out, like, what have they done beyond a lot of the misinformation stuff? Because, like, I mean, on our show, we've got we have had criticisms of those particular politicians in the past, but my guess is probably he's coming from a different and more misinformed angle. Anyway, DePerno blamed Benson for letting quote unquote Zuckerberg into our state with $8 million in illegal campaign finance violations. By the way, the Republican Party has had a huge responsibility in stopping the passage of campaign finance reform in the state of Michigan. So again, it is a fascistic tactic. Blame your opponent for that of which you are guilty. Now, of course, we could blame Democratic politicians at the state level for holding their hands in their pockets at certain moments, but yeah, again, the Michigan Republican Party has a huge responsibility in stonewalling any sort of election transparency legislation. So again, he goes on to say, she allowed him to control your elections. Again, right-wing tactic, pointing to one specific billionaire. She allowed him to put his collection boxes in Democratic-controlled locations and destroy your election. Also, what does Mark Zuckerberg has nothing to do with collecting election ballots. Again, we're not big fans of Mark Zuckerberg on our show, but there's enough real stuff to criticize him about. We don't need to make stuff up. We will hold her accountable, he said. Backing the militias that stormed the Capitol in Lansing in April 2020 to oppose any measures to stem the spread of the coronavirus, DePerno pledged to end mask and vaccine mandates. He also attacked critical race theory as unconstitutional and vowed to no longer allow these Democrats to teach our children to hate God, hate their country, and hate their family. You know, I've learned the truth about American history. I don't necessarily hate America. I just, you know, it might be better to repeal and replace it, but hate doesn't really come into the equation. Sorry, sorry, not sorry. Anyway, Trump endorsed candidate for Michigan's 3rd congressional district, John Gibbs, spoke of his desire to oust rhinos, quote unquote, Republicans in name only, such as incumbent Republican Representative Peter Meyer, who was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Trump following the January 6th attack in Washington, D.C. The Republican speakers attacked immigrants, LGBTQ persons, coronavirus vaccines, mask mandates, critical race theory, and their alleged socialist communist opponents in the Democratic Party. Again, as a socialist slash communist, do not put me in that bracket with those people. The Democratic Party are capitalists. We are not. I'm going to say this again and again till the end of time. You know, do not group us with those folks, please. Anyway, Trump is free to continue to cultivate a fascist movement hell bent on overturning. And this is really important because it talks about the whole Democrats just kind of putting their hands in their pockets thing. That Trump is free to continue to cultivate a fascist movement hell-bent on overturning democratic forms of rule is entirely the fault of the Biden administration, the Democratic Party, and Attorney General Merrick Garland. Trump and the Republican Party are working to place the election machinery in every state in the hands of Trump acolytes who are committed to overturning elections that go the quote-unquote wrong way. They're being enabled by the Democrats who have refused to prosecute the ringleaders of the coup attempt, beginning with the ex-president, and are engaged in a cover-up of the January 6th coup and the ongoing preparations for a new coup. Sorry. In an interview Sunday on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain refused to confirm reporting in the New York Times that Biden had privately called for Trump to be prosecuted for inciting a coup. He told Stephanopoulos that he had never heard the president advocate for prosecution of any person. And again, as we've said time and time on the show before, if there's no consequences, this stuff will happen again. And if we're looking for historical parallels, a lot of people make the Nazi Germany comparisons. If you look at, about 10 years before the Nazis came to power, there was the beer hall push, which was a similarly degraded, failed coup attempt. A lot of people made jokes about it at the time. And then 10 years later, there's the Reichstag fire, and we all know what happened after that. So, yeah, we need to take this stuff seriously. And, America has always, or at least definitely for the last century, started as a colonial project. Again, Hitler himself was largely taking a lot of notes off of our history of colonial expansion and genocide. So America has always grappled and been kind of a fascist light country, or a country. I would read George Jackson's analysis of American fascism. It's really key. I'd recommend y'all check that out. But we are moving into a new phase where it seems American fascism can no longer keep the mask on its face, and it's starting to accelerate towards more extreme and open forms of fascism that should leave all of us deeply concerned about our future in the next few years. And again, it is something that the right-wing Democratic Party has failed to take seriously, and that could be to the detriment of all of us. All right, we're going to take another quick break. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also watch our full episodes on our YouTube page. And we also have a podcast. You can find on most podcast platforms. We put together the best material from our show, have a couple installments every month you can download, listen to on the bus or while you're at work. Hey, maybe you can put it on the speaker while you're working, get your coworkers to listen to it. Maybe y'all can organize a union or try like the good folks over at Maru or at the Kalamazoo Public Library. Shout out to them. By the way, that's still ongoing. Maru Workers United. There's just some press coverage of them in live. Check that out. So again, we're going to take a quick little break. And when we come back, we got more for you. Y'all are listening to Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for political revolution. Welcome back. This is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. You can also find us online at YouTube, and we got a podcast y'all can subscribe to. That's Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. Y'all listening to WIDR Kalamazoo. And we got some more to talk about, and I think I would be remiss if we didn't spend some time in the show talking about one of the big stories and a bit of good news. We don't get to talk about good news a whole lot on the show, and this is some really great news. As y'all may have heard, the Amazon workers out in Staten Island were successful in their attempt to create the first unionized workforce at Amazon. And I think with me just being in the pilot seat here, I'm gonna one of the best pieces of coverage I found was from Left Voice that really gets into some of the nuts and bolts of the opposition they faced and some of the tactics they used in order to be successful. So I wanted to read from that. This was again published by Left Voice on April 1st, written by Tatiana Cazzarelli and Molly Rosenzweig. And article is headlined, "In a Historic Victory, Staten Island Workers Form the First U.S. Amazon Union." Amazon workers at the JFK 8 warehouse on Staten Island in New York voted to unionize. In doing so, the warehouse has formed the first U.S. union in the company's history. The Amazon workers formed an independent union known as the Amazon Labor Union. It's hard to overstate the significance of this win. Amazon is the second biggest employer in the United States, known both for its brutal work conditions and highly effective union-busting campaigns. The company has spent over $4 million on union-busting consulting, all while it reaps immense profits from hyper-exploiting its workforce. But today at the Staten Island warehouse, or April 1st, we should say, workers defeated Amazon. The final vote count was 2,645 to 2,131. The Staten Island unionization drive was not led by any of the big labor unions. Rather, it was led by former Amazon employees, including Chris Smalls, who was fired from Amazon in 2020 after organizing a walkout protesting the conditions at the warehouse. The Amazon Labor Union is recognized by the National Labor Relations Board as an independent union. They were able to defeat the Amazon Goliath using funds collected primarily through GoFundMe. Amazon engaged in various union-busting tactics, including anti-union signs, paid union busters, mandatory anti-union meetings, and illegally threatening workers attempting to organize. A Staten Island Amazon worker, Tasha Jones, said that in the days before the vote, managers met with workers to explicitly tell workers to vote no. "They didn't tell us at the beginning to vote no," she said, "but I will say the last meeting was something else." Yet, the majority of workers rejected Amazon's anti-union propaganda and voted in favor of unionization. In fact, last month, a union organizer and 2 workers were arrested for trespassing at Amazon. Chris Smalls was charged with trespassing, obstructing governmental administration, and resisting arrest. Smalls went to the warehouse to deliver union materials and food. This is a clear intimidation tactic by an increasingly desperate Amazon. Amazon workers are among the most hyper-exploited in the country, working long hours and back-breaking labor. In the words of Francis Wallace, a worker interviewed by Left Voice in Bessemer, Alabama last year, "is extremely tiring." I will agree with that. Of course, there's bending and standing up all the time. There's a ladder inside my area because I do stowing. I'm climbing up and down the ladder, bending up and down, picking up the boxes. When you do that for 10 hours straight, and you only have 3, maybe 15-minute breaks, it gets really tiring. Another worker reported extremely hot warehouses without ventilation. Multiple workers have died on the job at Amazon warehouses over the past year. 6 died during a tornado that struck the Midwest in December, and 2 died at the Bessemer location. One worker suffered a stroke after being told by management that he couldn't leave work. Hours later, another worker died. There's no shutdown. There's no moment of silence. There's no time to sit and have a prayer, Perry Connolly explained. A couple of people that worked directly with him were badly shaken up and wanted to go home and were not allowed to. The sudden union victory challenges the conventions of traditional unionizing campaigns, which rely on big unions tied to the Democratic Party, years of one-on-one meetings, and working at a snail's pace. The ALU filed with the NLRB with only 30% of the signing cards supporting a union, far lower than the roughly 80% typically advocated by the unionizing playbook. The Staten Island workers' victory is part of a wave of unionization sweeping the country. 9 Starbucks have unionized in the past few months, with well over 100 locations filing for union elections. It's part of a new generation of workers who know that they need a union. The Washington Post explains that many leaders of the movement are in their early 20s. They're leaning into the nickname Generation U for union. Approval of unions is as highest as it's been since 1965, with a 68% approval rating, which rises to 77% among Americans aged 18 to 34. We may be witnessing a generation of workers who refuse to abide by the rules neoliberalism imposed on the labor movement for decades. This is a precarious generation that is highly indebted and has little to lose. It's a generation that's highly politicized, challenges the status quo, and hopes that unions can be a democratic tool to defend their interests against the bosses. There's also a generation that has experienced and participated in the Black Lives Matter movement, and many are making the connections between the struggle for Black liberation and the struggle for unionization. Connection was made explicit at the unionization effort in Bessemer. The Staten Island Amazon has an overwhelmingly Black and Latinx workforce, and this unionization campaign was led by Black and Latinx workers. Labor struggle and the fight to unionize is part of a struggle for Black lives. Staten Island is not the only Amazon warehouse counting votes this week. In Bessemer, Alabama, the NLRB threw out the last unionization vote due to an extensive illegal union busting techniques used by Amazon, including putting a mailbox on Amazon property when they are explicitly instructed not to do so. While the vote against the union last year was a landslide victory for Amazon, the votes this time are too close to call, with the current tally standing at 933-2 and 875 against the union, and 416 ballots being challenged to be reviewing at a hearing. Today's unionization victory also comes in the context of other Amazon mobilizations. Just a few weeks ago, three Amazon warehouses walked off the job. More than 60 employees at 2 delivery stations in Queens, New York, and one outside of Washington, D.C., walked out to demand a $3 per hour hourly raise. This is the first multi-state walkout at U.S. Amazon warehouses. This victory must be seen in the context of a shift in working class consciousness as a result of the pandemic. Workers are essential, they know it, and deserve to be treated as such. As part of this context is widespread hatred of Jeff Bezos and the billionaires who profit from the hyper-exploitation of workers and whose fortunes have ballooned during the pandemic. Against this backdrop, we have also seen the Great Resignation, where individuals resign in frustration with working conditions. Another was Striketober, in which we saw strikes at John Deere, Kellogg, Columbia University, and a number of smaller strikes. Sacramento teachers are also on strike, coming on the heels of the Minneapolis teacher strike, which ended last week. Importantly, Staten Island workers' victories will surely inspire other Amazon workers, both nationally and internationally. As the Starbucks unionization wave highlights, one union can inspire hundreds of others. There is tremendous potential for the working class at this moment. Again, that was an article from Left Voice. In a historic victory, Staten Island workers formed the first U.S. Amazon union. So one thing, a couple things I wanted to mention in this article didn't really hit on. So one of the cool things, the union organizers, again, these aren't people with a long history in traditional labor unions. And we've had some of our critiques about how a lot of modern labor unions have been defanged. They work a lot with capital. But these are like new, hungry people who have been radicalized by living in the 20th century. And they were able to do it in this incredible grassroots way. They talk about just like meeting workers at the bus stop, constantly having cookouts and parties and inviting workers to them and, getting them involved, talking about forming a union, these very tangible demands related to better working conditions. It's worth noting Chris Smalls himself has really emerged as a new kind of untraditional leader. Somebody who Again, he is very charismatic and very knowledgeable. Of course, he would be the first to acknowledge the horizontal nature of the organizing and the need for mass grassroots involvement. But the fact that again, this is somebody organizing outside of traditional labor circles, somebody who's younger, part of a Generation U, as you call it, and importantly, is not relying on establishment politicians or labor unions to organize workers. There's been some coverage of his little combativeness with AOC, and just to explain that, somebody who doesn't work inside this sort of acceptable pipeline between like talking to these social democrat politicians and then feeding back. It's like, no, it's workers are doing it for themselves. It's something that absolutely should be commended. And something that I think is worth pointing out is it's some great schadenfreude on Amazon's part. Back in 2020, Amazon actually had this is leaked, they had a strategy. They wanted to uplift Chris Smalls, make him the focus of Amazon unionization, because basically some old school race baiting. They thought this young black guy who dresses in an urban fashion somehow would scare off people, Amazon workers, from unionizing. Unfortunately for them, all they did is uplift this very knowledgeable, charismatic labor organizer who now has formed the first Amazon union in the United States. So in some ways, Amazon did it to themselves. And again, they're trying to play into some dog whistle racism, but turns out workers are not quite as racially biased as they thought. And Chris Smalls has emerged as a great leader and has brought this great victory to workers. And I'm hoping that it inspires many workers around the country, whether they're working at Amazon or any other low wage, low benefit job, to organize and get back to the kind of working class militancy we had in the early part of the last century that brought us some gains. And hey, maybe even someday a full-on revolution. We'll see. Again, this is how we start building up, resurrecting the organized left in the United States, the organized working class, which again, if you know your history, is one and the same. Don't listen to those Republican propaganda about like, oh, what working class people really care about is, having no social services and, being bigoted against trans people. It's like, no. Working class wants to get paid. Working class wants to control the means of their own production, as it were. So we're going to take a quick little break. Y'all are again listening to Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR or online at widerfm.org. When we come back, maybe I have like one more story to hit on. And again, you can also find us on YouTube. I believe we will soon be airing on the Public Media Network for those who still watch the TV on the cable. Hey, tell your aunts and uncles, get off that CNN, get off that MSNBC, get off that Fox News. There's a local guy telling you the real news. Check it out. And we also have a podcast you can check out, Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. We put together the best coverage on our radio show. You can download it, listen to it on the bus while you're at work, maybe get your other workers to listen to it, maybe organize a union, maybe inspires you, who knows. Anyway, y'all listening to Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR, your only source for political revolution. Hello, everybody. We're back. Once again, this is Media Cyphers, only on 89.1 WIDR. We're online at widerfm.org. We've got, I'm going to leave you with one last story. And this is something I came across from MLive's coverage, and it was a really good article. I just want to share it with y'all, talking about Indigenous issues here in the state of Michigan. And again, this is also kind of a bit of I don't know, good news, but it's a story of resilience and how Indigenous folks here in Michigan were able to weather and continue to weather the COVID pandemic. So this was published April 3rd. Headline is, "To Protect Elders, Michigan's Indigenous Tribes Showcased a Resilience Passed Down for Generations." It's written by Alyssa Burr. The COVID-19 pandemic seriously affected the elders of Michigan's Native American tribes, who were faced with a high number of coronavirus-related deaths on top of the disruption of in-person gatherings, traditions, and ceremonies that are essential to tribal life. And over the course of the past several years, the deep-rooted values instilled by the elders allowed for tribes to make the necessary adaptations when confronted with the challenge of how to protect some of their most vulnerable and valued members. Nancy Smith, Tribal Council Secretary for the Nottawataseppi Huron Band of the Potawatomi in Fulton, serves on the Elder Committee of her tribe. She said elders are held of the highest esteem as tribal leaders, ensuring that those in the tribe are following practices, customs, and understand the history of their people. There's a wealth of knowledge there that we get to retain within our community, Smith said. With the passing of an elder, we lose a little bit of that history. Across racial demographics, older age groups have suffered the most from COVID-19 related deaths, but the virus has also killed American natives at especially high rates. Here in Michigan, the state reports American Indian and Alaskan natives have a death rate of 3,927 per million as of March 18th, ranked only second behind African American deaths. Laura Kaminsky, communications manager of the Gun Lake tribe in Shelbyville, said it only takes one tribal elder to walk on or transition from one life to the next to make a huge impact on a tribe. That elder could be the one we learn our language from or who we ask to conduct ceremonies for our community, Kaminsky said. Without even just one elder, it can make a difficult change that will affect our entire tribe. Although some of those connections have been severed due to such high death rates, the teachings of resilience and perseverance from elders remained as the tribes mobilized to fight the virus and its resulting impacts. Kaminsky said the tribe's elders and leadership kept the community strong by making decisions that put unity and wellness at the forefront of the tribal community early on. Early in the pandemic, Gun Lake Tribe's Health and Human Services Department provided direct outreach to elders, Kaminsky said. The wraparound services provided for our tribal elders included home visits, delivery of essential supplies, and wellness check phone calls. Health and Human Services continues to provide ongoing communication regarding health and safety guidelines and updates, including continuous access to clinical staff for citizens to call with COVID-19 related questions at any time. Cameron Ryan, Community Health Outreach Manager for the Nottawataseppi Huron Band of the Potawatomi, said social support was also necessary at a time when communities were unable to come together for things like tribal meetings or powwow, a cultural gathering where people come together to dance, sing, socialize, and honor their heritage. Some of our elders obviously have been around for a long time, so they are alive when it was illegal to practice culture, Ryan said. Having some of that taken away, I'm sure brings back some of that trauma. For Kaminsky, they were fortunate enough to make adjustments in programming and services to a virtual format. While we would all rather gather in person, virtual options have allowed us to continue to stay in touch and maintain our community, Kaminsky said. Once the vaccination rollout began in December 2020, the shot became a key strategy in slowing down the high death rates among tribal elders. With a deep-rooted mistrust of the government and a generation that was subjected to years of forced assimilation, Kaminsky said the tribal elders were looking to make an informed decision. At the beginning of the vaccination rollout, our Elder Services Department fielded numerous requests for more information, Kaminsky said. Through working with our Health and Human Services Department to get all available information, they have become very responsive to vaccination. As of March 17th, according to state data, American Indian and Alaskan Native residents account for the third highest percentage of vaccine initiation rates and have the second highest vaccine completion rates when looking at coverage by race. Ryan said, despite historical trauma, having health experts within the tribe assisting with the rollout meant that elders were more likely to seek the vaccine. The Nottawataseppi Huron Band of the Potawatomi has 3 tribal clinics: Urban Indian Health Clinic in Grand Rapids, Pine Creek Reservation Health Clinic, and a health clinic out of Firekeepers Casino near Battle Creek. I think because we already had health services in place, we were able to bridge that gap, Ryan said. The way tribes were able to rally around the older generations throughout the pandemic says a lot about who we come from and the people that made sure that we listened to those stories and just knew how to survive, said Smith. We live for those future generations to make sure that they have a place, that they know who they are, where they come from, and who their people are, Smith said. So with that, I think we're going to close out today's show. Quick reminder, you can listen to our program. We are on air and wider every Tuesday from 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. You can also check us out online. There's a couple ways to do that. We have a YouTube channel where we upload all of our episodes. Please, subscribe, check that out. Share it with your friends if you want. We also have a podcast, Media Cyphers Kalamazoo. You can look that up on most podcasting platforms. And we take the best material from our radio program and upload a couple of episodes a month for your listening pleasure. You can download it or, subscribe, etc. Play it at work or on the bus or wherever. And I do believe we are also going to be very soon on the Public Media Network. So if you got older friends who maybe still have cable television, and you're like, hey, Aunt Betty or whatever, stop listening to that CNN, that Fox News, that Newsmax, that MSNBC, and check out some local news from a working class guy, some working class folks who really know what's going on. And that'll be over on the Public Media Network. Anyway, we're going to close out show. As always, I want to thank everybody out there for listening. And until next time, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.